If we look at the different purposes that roads are used for, they may be used for access to farms, access to fields, or they may be used for taking that produce away up into main roads. They may be used primarily for attending health centres or markets. And understanding that purpose and understanding the consequence of that purpose on the type of vehicles is important.
That there have been roads which haven't been used as much as they thought they would, so the argument from the transport services side would be, well, it's a waste of investment. But there are exceptions, to be fair, and very often people, the engineers designing roads, have not considered sufficiently the transport side in terms of the diversity of vehicles or whatever, provision for non-motorized transport or whatever.
There have been a number of challenges that I have faced in the rural road sector. I think one of the major challenges has been lack of documentation to allow rural roads to be provided more cost effectively.
If roads are built according to manuals, the only actual way to ensure that your recommendations are put into practice is to ensure that these are in manuals.
The biggest step, or the biggest barrier for that has been the lack of local standards and specifications. It's unrealistic to expect local contractors, local road agencies, to take the risk themselves of building innovative roads if they can't fall back on legal specifications.
The main drivers in changing mindsets and doing things differently, in fact, should always be through local champions. It's all well and good making recommendations and so on from outside, but ultimately we do need local buy-in and local champions to drive things forward, to do things differently.
Too often engineers design on the assumption that the maintenance will be there, the assumption that this is going to happen, and they're not necessarily getting the best value for money as a result. And they may have to accept that roughness values on gravel roads are going to be higher than they would like. But if you don't have the funding to build paved roads, if you don't have the funding to do the periodic maintenance for paved roads, we're going to be left with gravel roads.
In some countries, and for reasons that are perfectly valid, the government decides that the programme will be implemented on a more labour-intensive basis. So if you are asking them to do preventive maintenance, which involves regularly, weekly cleaning off growth of vegetation, clearing blockages in drainage, mending some small potholes that could occur before they become a problem, that is something that can be done on a labour-intensive basis and with a certain amount of training and guidance.
The way that methods and tools have changed is varied. Some things have changed dramatically in that using mobile phone technology, GPS, digital cameras, those sort of things have greatly enhanced some of the techniques, certainly for locationing, planning, designing. A lot of that's changed dramatically. You no longer really need to use a notebook and a drawing board and so on. It's all done electronically. But ultimately, a lot of the techniques that are used for slope stabilisation haven't really changed. They're still largely labour-based. You still need to build a gabion in the same way. You need to create the platform and get the wire and fill it with stone, or you need to collect plant materials, prepare the site and plant them. And that's all still very labour-based, and there's only one way of doing it. Something which I find a little surprising that hasn't come in more is the use of smaller construction equipment for doing the more delicate work around roads.
An intervention, or in general interventions that were not so successful in my opinion, is that rural roads had always been designed to lower quality. It was always assumed that the recipient, usually governments, would then maintain it. This, as we have learned over decades is in most cases not ensured. Number one, there is no financing for it. Number two, it's not very lucrative for politicians, and therefore rural roads did not get that attention that they deserved. And therefore, the lesson I learned out of it is that you should design rural roads to higher standards so that there is less maintenance.
Things to be cautious about with respect to materials, and I'll talk about materials specifically because it's perhaps my core thing I developed from. The key message is don't expect materials to behave as they do in temperate countries. These are materials that have been produced by residual weathering, which is a chemical process rather than a physical process, which it is in European or North American countries. So the big message is be careful about transporting European, North American test procedures, way of thinking about materials into particularly tropical areas.
And I think in the past, maybe we have not been sufficiently proactive in terms of getting decision makers and politicians on board. But more and more, we are adopting a much more holistic approach in terms of looking at a range of local champions and stakeholders to get their support for these new initiatives. And I think to a large extent, we're beginning to succeed.
The most progress has been made that I can see in the last 15 to 20 years is in the use of local materials. The use of materials that perhaps 20 years ago would not have been considered are now used normally. The appreciation that local materials are the way to go. When that is fully on board, I think we'll have made a major breakthrough. The least progress has been made is on maintenance. I see very little improvement in the last 15 to 20 years on that. We're still getting poorly maintained, in fact, almost totally unmaintained rural road networks.
There's nothing wrong with being left with gravel roads. I always like to point out, and many people are not aware of this, which country in the world has by far the longest network of gravel roads? And it's the United States. But the United States finds it economic to have gravel roads. So one doesn't need to say that all gravel roads in the developing world need to go overnight. That is completely ridiculous, you know. We have to work with gravel roads. We have to still plan them and you know, still design them and integrate them into our planning.